So lately, there has been a trend of people getting into 14 and asking, for advice and asking for opinions. And as we compare WoW and 14 and even Guild Wars, when you hop into 14 for the first time, you are often told that story is what matters. And as I see people do that, they sometimes take that phrase really far. Um, I literally in chat today, in another stream, saw the phrase "without story, this game is worthless," and I think that is meant to be paid as an immense compliment to the story. But imagine for a second that you're invited to a dev room, a dev luncheon, and everybody speaks English in this version of the world. In Final Fantasy, and all the devs are there, and you're talking to the story writer, and you're telling them, this story has changed the way I look at games. This story has sent me through a roller coaster of meaningful emotions. It has made this game one of the most meaningful games to me that I've ever played. And as you two walk together to go get a drink, you walk by somebody you don't notice, and you say the phrase, "Without story, this game is worthless." But the person that you're brushing by is an encounter designer. They play for combat, they love ultimates, they love savages. They play other games for words like mythic. They play for top-end fractals. They play Diablo to dive down greater rifts. Mechanics are their joy. Mechanics are their driving force. And yes, their encounters, of course, have to be respectful of story, and the immersion can mean something to a lot of people. But in that moment, that's not what you said. In that moment, the words that you used are "without story, this game is worthless." I think that's really unfair to that person. And that person is sitting there, and they turn to the crafting designer and they say, "Did you know that without story, Ishgard Restoration is worthless?" And they go, "Well, that's kind of a bummer." As they turn to one of the glamour designers and they say, "I know you put a lot of stuff in Ishgard Restoration, but without story, it's worthless." I think that you're taking something that means a lot to you in order to point out that it could mean a lot to someone else. And you're implying that whatever it is that they're into will be improved by story. And that might be true. But what if it isn't? What if somebody just isn't driven by story in games? What if somebody doesn't connect with stories centered on protagonists that isn't them, and they prefer to be in a more immersive world and less of following a story? They'd prefer to be in a place like Lord of the Rings, where there is a world taking place, than something like Harry Potter, where you're following a protagonist, and the world doesn't always have to make sense. We're following their journey. What if that's not the kind of story that speaks to them? Should they not be allowed to enjoy Final Fantasy XIV? Well, they have friends that play the game. They like mechanical, battle-based games. They like healing their friends or tanking for their friends. They like DPSing big bad monsters and getting shiny loot. They love messing with glamour. They like wrapping their mind around a crafting and gathering system. They like exploring open worlds. They love listening to the music. They like watching the cutscenes. They love being a part of a community. But story just isn't their thing. But honestly, they must also just be playing the game that's worthless, because they're playing it without the story. They're doing it. Square Enix sold them a level boost that skipped them over the story, and then they played through Shadowbringers pressing the escape key like their keyboard would explode if they stopped. It's not for them, but it's worthless. I think that this is incredibly dangerous when we get into being excited about a game and we start implying that the number one thing about that game for us has to be the number one thing for everybody else. For me, the number one thing that drives me wanting to get into a perpetually online game that I can't load onto my Switch and take with me, I can't play with the sound off and just ignore everybody else and play on my TV alone and never interact with another player, pause to talk to my wife, unpause, pause to go get dinner, unpause. I can't do that. The whole benefit for me is community, especially that intimate definition of that word. I will play through a terrible game with terrible story to play with my brothers or my close friends. I will. And thankfully, Final Fantasy is not a terrible game. I enjoy the combat, Deliberum might be my favorite dungeon ever added to this game because of its combat. Not because of Queens of Gunhildr quests, but because the encounters are fun. I like them. I like doing them, which is good because they're going to ask me to run it about 1,000 times to get all my relics. I think that when we talk about playing these games, when I look at my favorite times in World of Warcraft, when I look at my favorite times in my short time in Guild Wars 2, my favorite memories so far are when I'm with friends. I play for community, but we regularly get asked, can I play Guild Wars alone? Can I play World of Warcraft alone? Can I play Final Fantasy alone? Some people would prefer Final Fantasy doesn't even have the first M on MMO. Of course you can play alone. Most of the story will be alone. You'll have single-player scenarios. You'll get pushed into some 4-man dungeons, but they're short and you never have to do them again. And when you get into Shadowbringers, you can replace those with NPCs. You don't have to do the high-end raid content. You don't have to work on your relic. And if you do, Bozja is really cool because it offers this other way where you can go through and you can do old content. Probably can't progress it all the way, but you can avoid other players as much as possible. Well, to me, and my definition of what an MMORPG is, why would you play like that? Why would you deny yourself these interactions? Where I have met people that I played with online for years. I got to go see 2 people get married that met on this game on World of Warcraft, and I got to go sit in the seats at their wedding. That I know them through a game. I have incredibly close friends who probably wouldn't be nearly as close with me had we not had a game in common, something to fuel that. I have had games that over the last 4 years in the United States, anytime there has been political strife, anytime there's been a debate over our interaction with another country or with ourselves, the own factions inside our country, I have had friends that disagree with me on a fundamental level about topics I do not talk about here because I don't need them to be here. They're divisive. And you know what? When it comes to games, they don't matter. When it comes to games, that can preserve that friendship for a day when maybe things have cooled down enough that we can have a less heated conversation. That maybe either of us has changed enough in our views that we can tolerate the other one in those topics. And we can preserve that friendship in a time capsule for that later day. And on those topics, we can keep them to the side. Because friendship doesn't have to mean that we're aligned on all things. Games can do that. To me, community is everything. And so I could say to somebody who's on the community team, to somebody that helped drive the systems that led to that, without community, this game is worthless. It's an MMORPG without community. It's just an RPG with less agency in the story, with less agency in the combat systems, with a required online state, with a weird version of DRM. I don't need an online connection to verify my ownership at all times. I don't need a continued subscription at that point. What am I paying you for? I can just buy the DLCs when I'm ready to get to the content. I don't think that's fair because that's my view. I think that's uniquely my point of view. And by uniquely, it's uniquely mine in how important it is. There are others that also feel community is important. And when we talk about content, there are people out there that the content is everything. The battle content is everything. The core loop of what the first thing named in a patch is after possibly changes in the story. This story is going to take us to this other place. Yeah. And we're going to fight bosses. You're going to get new abilities this next expansion. You're going to get new loot. There's going to be shiny things that are hard to earn. And you're going to master them. And you're going to overcome them. You're going to be able to put out new levels of damage. You're going to be able to put out different ways on different classes of providing utility to the group you're with. You're going to be able to rise to the challenge of words like extreme, savage, ultimate, heroic, mythic. You're going to be able to take that as far as you want. That's really cool. That's super cool. For other players, it's PvP. You're going to be able to test your mettle against real-life other players. Not something that some devs scripted and tested. No. Other players. Strategies are going to change. The meta's going to shift. And it's going to be whoever is the most resilient, the most adaptable, the person that can persevere to push past the other one, to achieve over them. to take victory. It's competitive. There's a leaderboard. May the top person stand at the end. We're going to have an invitational for the people that are the best at this. And wow, they even have the best at the 5-man dungeons for Mythic. They have the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, and the MDI defines a lot of the way the whole game plays for the fact that people who participate in the MDI are a very small percentage. It affects many even casual players' thoughts on what class they should play, what covenant they should pick. It matters. And without that competition, is the game worthless? Without that battle content being challenging, is it worthless? Without new classes, is it worthless? Without an interesting cosmetic system, without side content to explore and fill the void, once you've chewed through the main course, it's the appetizers and the desserts that I'm really here for. It's those savory moments where I'm enjoying something because I'm invested in the world. That's the foundation. And once I'm invested in the world, I want to go explore things like the Golden Saucer, like the Darkmoon Fair, like Beast Tribes. I want to go explore all of this side content that fills out the world for me. I want to take that one step further, and I want to RP. I want to go into a community and I want to leave my mark on this world. I want us to adventure together, to slay bosses, to be the Warrior of Light, to be the Champion of Azeroth. And that's assuming that every person that plays these games is a single-minded person. And that really it's not, there's kind of 2 or 3 things that are important to me, and having all of one and none of the other 2, that's not really going to do it. I'm really looking for something that's a package. The idea that MMOs need to have a single most important priority, a single leading factor that is pervasive in all things, and that as a result of having that thing, it should be the most important to all players. That doesn't make any sense to me. Do the devs have things that enhance the entire experience? To have a good story and a deep world, should every piece of content be respectful of that world for the people that it matters to? Yes. Should those content pieces be able to stand on their own if that story is removed by a player? Absolutely. So, can something be important in a developer philosophy? Can something be important in a content schedule? When we talk about priority, when we talk about resource management? Absolutely. But if a restaurant is known for one dish and they put all their focus on their best ingredients, best chef, best spot on the menu, most important recommendation by every waiter on the sign, in the ad, but they have other dishes, and if people want to come in and order those, that's okay too. And if they get to the end of the meal and they feel it's worth what they paid for, that's fine. Maybe they're allergic to one of the ingredients in the main thing. Maybe they just don't like it. Maybe they had it yesterday at a place that's also pretty good. That's okay. It doesn't matter. Now, should other dishes push that one off the menu simply because some people don't like it? No, having a cohesive design philosophy is important. Having consistency in what you communicate is important. I have been playing Final Fantasy since A Realm Reborn, and I have been communicated to that every expansion starts with a full-blown, single-player RPG story as its first and foremost content. Every time I've wanted to get to new trials and new dungeons, they've been locked behind MSQ. And I knew that. That was on the cover. That was what was presented to me, and it has been consistently enforced. I have known and been constantly reminded that story is important to the design and the foundation of this game. I know that, but I have also known that the devs have welcomed me as a player, and that I have gotten my value and my joy out of the game, even when at times in history I have pushed escape on that content, even when that content has not been for me. Just because it's not for me, I still come in the door, I walk right past the sign talking about the specials. I sit down and the waiter suggests the special, and I order what I want. And it gets to the table, and I'm thrilled. And I'm there with friends who are there for the special. Brian loves the story and always has. I'm there with my friends that are invested in the story. And I'm there with other friends who also don't like the story. My brothers played for a while, and they actually liked playing PvP. And they liked playing with me. And that was enough for them, for it to be fun and worthwhile. And their top 2 priorities were not necessarily what maybe the devs put in mind. But the devs, when asked at the live letter, at FanFest, what the theme of the next expansion is, did not answer that question. Because they said they don't want that theme to become the right way to play. They said players need to come in and have their own joy, even if it's not what the devs envisioned. That the theme of the next expansion, if they had to be pushed on it, was have fun. This is a game. And so I think there's this theme of, does story matter in Final Fantasy XIV? It matters if you say it matters. Now, should you skip the story in a narrative-based MMO and then tell other people that they're trash for liking it? No, but honestly, you shouldn't walk through life and tell other people they're trash for being different than you anyway. That's not unique to this. You just shouldn't do that. Your day isn't better and their days may be worse. Why? Don't do it. But if somebody just wants to come in and mind their own business, and when they announce a new dungeon, you hear them cheer, or when they announce a new trial, you hear them cheer, and they say, I can't wait to clear that. I can't wait to fight that boss. And you say, yeah, it's pretty meaningful story-wise. And they go, that's not really my thing, but I'm really looking forward to the new boss. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Do it. So the simple answer is, no, there is not one be-all, end-all, and the story does not matter unless you want it to. This game has invested an immense amount of resources in its story. So if you're going to give one a shot, I encourage you to give Final Fantasies. I do. But if you know for a fact that you don't like story and you try out the beginning and you say this isn't for me, get into the game, enjoy the game for the reasons you enjoy the game. And if you change your mind later, it's not going anywhere. They literally built New Game Plus so that people could go back and re-experience it or experience it for the first time. It's not a big deal. It'll be there. There are content creators out there that put out lore summaries. Not for just people that forgot, but for people that want to catch up. I think I'm starting to care about this game a little more. I don't regret the fact that I was a story skipper until the beginning of Shadowbringers. Because I'm happy that I had so many years of joy and fond memories in this game that brought me to here. Shadowbringers happened to capture me as a story. It didn't have to. And I would have kept having joy. And because it has, I'm going back and I'm enjoying that story. Not because the story suddenly got better, but because it means something different with Shadowbringers context. And that difference is enough to overcome the fact that, yes, it is still slow. And it's not holding me back from battle content. I resented the story early on for holding me back from playing with my friends. But now I have a main character. If Brian hops on and wants to go run Del Reyna, let's do it. Well, aren't you doing a story right now? I can switch. It's no big deal. And so I think, for me, story is a very, very optional thing in games. How story is told and what it means to a game is more in the eye of the beholder. As we compare games more and more, as people come over from different games, in Final Fantasy, it is a single story arc following a protagonist on the rails down this path. And if you get off that train at any point and you want to catch up with current content, you have to get back on that train and finish the path. You're on a monorail through the theme park. You cannot get off early unless you pay the money. That's it. World of Warcraft, you're establishing a world. And whether or not you feel you have meaning into it is up to you. Whether or not you feel you have meaning into it is up to your engagement. If you feel that you impacted the opening of Encourage, then you did. Your champion of Azeroth did. If you skipped that content, then yours did not. If you feel your character had an impact on the world, then it did. It's up to you. It's meaningful because you say it's meaningful. In Guild Wars, you can pause any of the stories at any time. You can fracture your story until it makes no sense. It's your journey. I think the only issue I have here is that we've decided that the way other people play isn't really gaming simply because they disagree with us. And that somehow their version is less than ours just because what they do from our perspective is only gaming, kinda.